So, some of our friends kind of in our area, there were a couple of BBSs that were already active, Bulletin Board Systems. And me, my dad, and my brother got really into that whole thing. My dad got so into it, he kind of decided he wanted to do it. Now, memory doesn't serve, and bro, you might have to put your comment in here, because I don't remember very clearly. I don't think that the Enchanted Forest was ever run off the Commodore 64. I remember getting on to Bulletin Board Systems with it, with its little plug-in 2800 baud modem or whatever. But I don't recall that we ever ran a BBS on it, because the Commie ran everything off a disk. So if it was running the BBS, then we couldn't do anything with it. And if it did run the BBS, then it did it at night and stuff like that. The BBS only would have been run during certain times. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Commie eventually just fried itself, and my dad wasn't really gonna. He didn't want to replace the power. So he looked into it, but he didn't really want to replace the power supply for a couple of reasons. And one of those reasons was because a friend of ours, I don't recall his name. I only remember going to this guy's house once. But that was the guy that we got the modem from. Maybe we went to his house twice, because the next thing we wound up with was an IBM 8088, an actual IBM XT. And that was very different from the Commie as far as operating systems went. It ran on DOS and everything. But overall, it could do a lot more. It was compatible with a lot more. You could take cards out of it and put them into it. We had an external modem at that point. And, we had some... Now, this was one of the IBMs that could do different... It was kind of weird, because the graphics card at that time could do, like, 256 colors or something. But generally, those displays they were only monochrome displays. So, it was 256 shades of gray, or green. In our case, we had a green display that could also be used as a regular green monochrome video monitor. Like, you could hook a VCR up to it in an emergency or something like that, if your TV died or what have you. And that's kind of when things started to get really cool, and we started to sort of forget about the dead Commie and sort of ignore the Atari a little more. And you couldn't plug Atari controllers into this, and generally upgrading the IBM was a little bit more expensive and stuff like that. But as I recall, it was kind of around that point that my dad decided he was going to start running a BBS. And, again, because we sort of wanted to use the computer, we had to kind of run the BBS between certain times. And I do remember getting our 6100, that was the last 4 digits of it, our phone line. We had an extra phone line, but we were almost always oblivious to it, because the phone line that extra phone line was pretty much just dedicated to allowing people to call into the Enchanted Forest. And there were a couple of other boards in the area. I don't even recall what their names were at this point. I logged on to them, I think a little bit with the Commie and a little bit with the XT and everything, and got onto them. But I really enjoyed using our board, the Enchanted Forest. And, for BBS, it was really elaborate. like, Eli and Ruben, you guys can certainly, chime in here on your comments and weigh in on this, but I think that we had one of the better BBSs in the Rio Grande Valley. Probably not in the country, but at least in our area, we had a really good BBS. And, we had people logging onto it every day. It wasn't long before I had people from, school starting to log on to the thing. And, again, my family wasn't, we kind of lived on a pretty good budget, so, a lot of our money and funds weren't really going to computer stuff. There's the phone line to pay for, and stuff like that. And we upgraded the XT as best we could, but I don't recall us ever really having, say, a color display for the XT. I could be wrong there. I don't recall us ever, doing more than we had to make that computer kind of work. Now, I had a friend, Jeremiah. Some of you out there might remember meeting him now and then. Jeremiah was kind of a computer geek too, and he had what I believe at the time they called a PS2, and that was essentially, if the XT was an 86, right? The computers are based on the x86 processor. At least they were for a while. Now that I think about it, I don't recall when the 86 quit being the one everything was based on. It was fairly recently, though. I could look it up on YouTube, but that just takes time. So chime in if you want input there. So we have like a 186 in the 8088. If you wanted to kind of look at it that way. And then Jeremiah got the PS2, which had, I think, the same connector for the keyboard, but then the mouse. And that was the other thing. The Kami didn't really have a mouse, but the XT did, for a lot of its graphical programs that you could load on it. And the XT also had a hard drive, like a 10 meg hard drive, which was like a lot back then. But, I would go over to Jeremiah's, and he had a 286, the PS2. Tandy, I think. A Tandy, yeah. It was a Tandy PS2. And he might still have that Tandy. He's kind of like that, and he doesn't like getting rid of things. But he used that Tandy for a long time. He kind of logged on to Enchanted Forest now and then, and a lot of the other boards. And we had a computer club at the time called C.A.T.S, the Computer and Telecommunications Society. A couple of guys went through being president. My dad, I think, was the last president of it before we sort of had to dissolve it because, we were all just getting older. And it was getting hard to keep up with and rent facilities, and people were sort of donating less and stuff like that. But, he came to C.A.T.S meetings and stuff. But, he had this 286, and it was capable of a lot more. It could play a lot of the more high-end graphic games that were out there. You could view images on it in color. It was like a, 13 million color display or something like that. Big for the time. And I kind of spent a lot of time over at his house sort of admiring his computer. We still kind of had the XT at home. And then at some point, a friend of my dad's, Steve, kind of started getting into computers too, and sort of together, Steve built a computer, and there were also computers starting to be used more at school. That just kind of came into my mind. But, you know, we still had this XT at home sitting on a shelf at that point, kind of being, I don't want to say useless, but we'd sort of pushed the limits of what it could do and played all the games we could really play on it and stuff in green monochrome. We'd kind of outgrown it a little bit. But we'd still be on it, you know. I remember being on it several times, even in high school, you know, talking to my science teacher who was logged on to the BBS, or talking to Eli or Ruben or Jeremiah or, you know, what have you. And my dad sat behind it plenty of nights, you know, adding stuff to the BBS because, you know, the XT was suitable for doing that. But point is, at some point, we wound up with a 386. So we had something finally like as good or a little better than, say, Jeremiah had. And he was shortly, you know, to upgrade to a 486 and everything like that. And then the 386 sort of was our kind of play, homework sort of office computer. And we're still kind of in the late 80s here. You know, very early 90s. I think maybe the internet was born, 91, right, was when the internet came about, technically, for public use. It seems like we got our 386 kind of like 90-ish, 1990-ish. And now, the cool thing about the 386 was we could finally start playing some of those games. It was kind of cool to play the games that we had for the XT, again, in color, you know. So we kind of found some new enjoyment there. You know, with the Office suite and stuff that was available, you know, there was a lot more. There was a lot more we could do with it, and you know, it didn't have to run the BBS. The XT was still sitting up on the shelf, you know, just its only job at that point was to stay connected to that phone line and run the BBS, or maybe occasionally call out to another BBS. But you know, again, this is sort of you know, by this time, I got to do a part C. Watch it.